Hey guys, Dilby here. Welcome back to the channel. So I've got a new track out on Glasgow Underground called Trippin', and today I'm going to show you through the project how I made it. So this is actually a pretty special one for me, as it's a cover of one of my favorite electronic tracks ever. I first heard Trippin' by Gold Tricks at a festival in 2001 and was blown away by the track, and I've loved it ever since. I actually detailed the whole story over on my Instagram, so go check that out if you're interested. But to make a long story short, I love the track and I've always wanted to do something with it. The way that this came about is basically I just wanted a version of the track that fit into my DJ sets. A bunch of people have done covers and retakes on the track throughout the years, and there's been some really cool remixes as well. But the track itself is like 22 years old at this point, and it's sounding a little bit outdated for my sets. So I wanted something that just slotted in perfectly with the music that I'm playing currently. So that's what I set out to do. I was really happy with the result and it was working well, so I sent it over to the guys from Glasgow Underground. They liked it and wanted to release it, and here we are today. As of recording, the track's at number 9 in the Deep House charts. Hopefully by the time you're watching this, it's going up. If you want to help that process and support me and support the channel, then there's a link in the description to Beatport where you can go buy a copy, and let's see what we can do. Push this guy out. Your support is much appreciated. And to go along with that, I've actually decided to run a competition to give away a mixdown. So along with DJing and producing, I also do mixing and mastering for people, and I'm giving away a mixdown for someone. So this is a service I would normally charge 250 to 300 euros for. Basically, you send me the stems of your track, I mix it down, get it sounding all nice and professional, and send back a master and a pre-master version. Mixes that I've done have been released on labels like Defected, Toolroom, 8-Bit, Crosstown Rebels, Spinnin. So I think it's a pretty cool prize, and hopefully you do too. To enter, all you need to do is buy a copy of Trippin' from Beatport and DM me on Instagram showing me a copy of your receipt. If you mention the fact that you're a patron, i.e. you're subscribed to my Patreon, then you will get 2 entries. And there's also a link in the description if you want to become a patron. And as a bonus, if the track makes it to the top 3 on the Deep House chart, I'm going to give away a second mix. So I think that's a pretty cool prize. If you want to get involved, I'll talk to you on Instagram. But for now, let's jump into Ableton and find out how I made this track. Right, so here we are inside Ableton, and this is the project for Trippin'. So as you can see, there's actually not too many tracks, which I'm quite proud of. I tend to, these days, aim to make music that's simple, but sounds complex, I guess. And I feel like in this, I've achieved that. So let's just start at the start. We'll go through with the drums, and actually I'm going to talk about the foundation of the track, because I feel like that's one of the most important aspects to get right. Once you've got that really solid foundation to build on top of, it's almost like everything else on top of that is a win. So let's just jump in and have a look. We'll start with the kick drum. So I've got a kick here from a little sample loop. I'm just ducking out a little bit around 215 hertz. And that's just to take out a little bit of boxiness, I think. That's normally what this is all about. Not doing too much. And you'll see, as always, I've got my low cut EQ here with automation. And then I color code it differently, with the pink representing places where I'm cutting out the low end. That sounds like this. And then that automation brings it back, brings the low end back in. You can see here I'm using these locators to represent where the breaks and drops and stuff are in the track. And I've given them names so that I can find everything and navigate easily through the track. You know, if all of this stuff is open and I'm kind of working on something, you know, I can't see the kick drum. So this just gives me allows me to always know what's going on in the track. I've obviously cleaned up this project. When I was working, obviously there's a bunch of things that I kind of try and don't end up using, so I turn them off. And then at the end, I go through a process of cleaning up the project just so I can find everything, making sure everything's named, that type of thing. So then we've got some claps. There's quite a bit going on in the claps. We've got 3 layers, I believe. A nice kind of drum machine style clap, quite tight. Something that's a bit more organic and open sounding, I believe, if I play them together. Yeah, this one here is pulled forward a little bit. So it's giving this kind of like pre-clap, which I believe, yeah, if you zoom in really closely, I've done this by hand, so these are all slightly different timing, just to really give it a little bit more of a humanized feel. These are playing exactly on the grid, but between these two, the relative positioning is slightly different over the course of 4 bars for each clap, and that just gives a little bit more humanization. It makes it feel a little bit more like a hand clap, right? I've got this clap here, which is coming from a top loop. Also quite forward. So this is just giving a bit of looseness to the claps. Nice. So those claps, they all sound quite different, right? So what I've done is tried to choose sounds that complement each other rather than sounds that are too similar. By doing that, it kind of adds up to a more unique and bigger sound in the end. This clap here is coming from a top loop, right? So on this top loop, I've cut out the claps, and on this one, I've cut out all the hats. And that's just to give me more control when I'm mixing. Because often top loops, I find like the claps are mixed really loud, which I want to be able to have control of. I like to put in my own claps and create my own kind of bass foundation for the track. Now we've got this snare groove. I'm not sure why I've frozen this, although it might have come from another track. I think I've taken this from a project which was also on Glasgow Underground, a collaboration with Simon Matson and Lazarus Man. So this is a stem from that project. So just some kind of groovy snare hits there. Sounds kind of like a 909 snare. It's got some automation with some delay sends. Sounds like this. Just helping to add some atmosphere. And then I'm sending that to a big reverb, just making it sound more atmospheric as well. Cool. So that's just adding some kind of groove to the track. Let's just loop this section here. We'll hear the kick, claps. And then the kind of main foundation of the track, I've used this top loop that I showed you before. Okay, let's loop this section here actually, and this shaker. And that's kind of the foundational part of the hi-hats really. Okay, so that's all kind of sounding really strong, a little bit groovy, all the sounds are working really nicely together, and then we've got the bass. So that's what I would call the foundation of the track, the kind of building blocks. If you think about track and like building blocks, this is just like creating a really solid, strong foundation on which we can put more characterful elements, the things that give the track the personality. And if you've got this really strong foundation, then it just kind of makes it much easier to build a really interesting track with less elements as well. You could also, I guess, include this low percussion loop I've got here. Possibly this tribal percussion loop. So when I'm actually building a track, I'm really trying to start with not much more than this. And then everything else is kind of added to create groove, emphasis, personality, that type of thing. So you'll notice here I've used quite a few loops, top loops and that kind of thing, rather than programming everything myself. I do a combination of both usually. And in this case, as I mentioned at the start, I was trying to kind of create this quickly, something to throw into my DJ sets, because I really, really enjoy the original. And I just felt like I didn't have a version of it that worked for my sets. So the aim was to create something that I could play. And I normally do that in a way where I'm quite inspired in the moment, and I've probably got a gig coming up that weekend, so I just want to kind of get it out and get something that I can try. And a pretty quick way to do that is using some loops. So let's have a quick look at this bass. I know I'm kind of jumping a little bit all over the place, but I want to talk about this foundational thing because I feel like it's quite an important aspect of the track that has this really strong foundation. So let's jump in here, and I'm going to show you a bunch of bass lines that I tried that didn't make the cut, right? So let's look at the MIDI here. We're in E minor. These are all just kind of, this is the way I write. I do it by trial and error. I throw in some ideas. I try and kind of experiment, change those ideas, see what's working, see what's not. and just keep kind of moving on, try something new. Because I create a new MIDI clip each time I try something different, I'm not kind of modifying the one that I'm working on. I don't lose any of the previous variations, which gives me a sense of kind of freedom and creativity. I'm not worried about whether I'm going to destroy what I'm doing. This is something that I've implemented into my workflow very purposefully to allow me to kind of have fun and be creative and just try things. That's why I always promote working in the session view. So when I'm doing my creative parts, I'm always working in the session view. So let's have a listen to some of these. So, you know, I guess it's kind of somewhere in the same idea as what we've got. That kind of like 16th thing with octaves and stuff. I mean, these are cool grooves. That's awesome. I think I would use that for a track. And this is another benefit of doing this, is like I'm creating a MIDI pack for my next track, you know. I can use this and just have that as a starting point for a new track. Now I've got this next block of MIDI clips. So I think I've kind of felt like that first idea wasn't working, and I'll go in a little bit into why in a second. So you can see here I'm really leaning into this octave thing. I like doing that a lot. I think it gives your bass lines real character. Now this is, I think, where I'm starting to get closer to the actual bass line. And I will just talk about it right now, because the reason I'm doing that is because of the main riff. The main riff comes from the original. Let me just copy this MIDI clip here. So this is the main riff in the original of Trippin', and I'll show you a little bit more about how I've made it. But for now, let's listen to it with the bass line. You can hear that that's not really working with the bass line. And if I go back to, say, this one, which I was liking, so the bass line on its own sounded cool. But when I start implementing this riff, this kind of really important part of the track, it's kind of clashing with the bass line. So those two elements individually are pretty cool, but together they're not really complementing each other. They're kind of fighting for attention rather than pushing the whole track forward as one. So back to these bass lines. So that one we heard. So this, I think, is getting closer to something that's working with the main riff. I'm pretty sure I started arranging everything with this bass line here, the one I said I liked, and that now I kind of got to pretty much the end of the track and was like, the bass line's not working. I've got to go back and rework it. That's why there's two blocks of MIDI clips. So if I add this riff in again, you can hear that's starting to sound much more like harmonious and complementary. Okay, that's what we've ended up with. I'm guessing I kind of tried to combine both somehow with these turned off notes. But let's solo this. So the reason why this works, the main bass, I'm just going to do it on C. Sorry, the main riff, I'm just going to play it on C, is playing this melody here. Very simple, right? But it's also got this dotted eighth note delay, which makes it into this riff like this. Right, so you can see how that's starting to line up with the bass line notes that I've played. And then I've got some little kind of complementary things in here to add groove and work between that. So it's always really, really important to get your elements to work together, create call and response, complement each other, reinforce each other, that type of thing. You can have like a great melody and a great bass line, but if they're not working together, then they're actually going to be kind of detracting from the track, not elevating it. So let's go back and have a look at some of the hats and stuff now that we've talked about that bass line. So I'm just going to turn off the melody, vocals, and effects, and we'll turn off the percussion. So we've got our kind of main thing going on with our top loop and our shaker. Right, then I've got this open hat. So this is a loop, but this is like something very similar to the type of drums that I program anyway. So I guess like I was trying to work quickly with this, but in the end, because I'm selecting sounds that I like, that kind of work for my style, it ends up sounding like something that I would program, and it kind of has my signature, I guess, if you want to call it that. Then we've got a ride. Really nice, adds some really good energy after the drop. And it's cool because it's not just playing the standard ride pattern with the kind of on-beat, off-beat type of thing. It's got a bit more groove and interest in it. And in terms of processing to that, I think I've done something, yeah. So I've got a bit of Haas effect. I've got some LFO tool, just sidechaining it to the kick. And I've got this auto pan set to noise. So that's kind of like basically random. And I'm just moving it around in the panorama ever so slightly. So I take off the Haas. So it's very subtle, but I'm just trying to add a little bit of width and movement and randomization to it. Then the Haas effect, which is just offsetting the left and right by 10 milliseconds in this case, is just spreading those signals wide. You want to be careful with this. If you have it too little or too much, then it's going to sound weird, maybe create phasing. I find 10 is pretty good to give it like a bit of subtle width. It's always worth checking your tracks in mono. Or not worth, I think it's very important to check your tracks in mono while you're working, to just make sure that things are not being lost due to phasing. And I would never add these kind of spatial widening effects to any of my elements that are really integral to the track. So basically, if it ends up on a mono system and some of this stuff disappears due to phasing or something like that, I want the like very important core elements to never be affected by that. So if I'm applying something like this to an element, I'm deciding in advance that I'm okay if that happens. It's not going to like ruin the track, but it sounds cool. All right, so we've got a couple more things. We've got a 16th hat here. Kind of like a shaker really, isn't it? And I guess I had that throughout, but I've just used it here at the drop to kind of create a little bit of differentiation in this section in the drums. And then we've got this riser. That's cool. So that's just a sample. It kind of almost sounds more like a bell or something than a ride, but that's what I've called it. And I'm just increasing that in volume. So it's acting literally as a riser, like it says. Nice. I really like that actually. Then I've got a couple of percussion loops, this tribal loop. So I've just quantized that and added the same swing that I'm using on other elements, MPC 1657, and that seems like all I've done to it. Cut out some of the lows, and then I've got this low percussion loop. It's taking away a little bit of the highs. Right, it's got this quite bright shakery type thing there, so I'm just bringing that down a little bit because I don't want to build up too much information in that high end. I want my hats to be punching through. And I've got some LFO tool, which I'm just ducking it to the kick. Not doing too much, but this like overlap where the kick happens, so it's just pushing that down because there's a decent bit of low mid frequency in here. Now this here is Metatune. This is from Slate Digital, and it's basically like auto-tune, and I'm just using it to try and tune these drums. I think if you look at them, yeah, no, I haven't tuned it. Maybe this one? Yeah, so this one I've pitched it down by 1 semitone to just try and get it to sound right with the track, with the E minor scale. So here I've got it set to E minor, and we'll see here some information whether or not it's pushing any of these into the scale. Right, so it seems like there's something happening on this A sharp and it's being pushed to the B. And you can see here some of these notes that are a little bit off are just being pushed as well. So just kind of tightening up the tuning a little bit. Probably not even that necessary, but you know, I deemed it to be necessary somewhere along the way. So that's the drums. Pretty simple, but effective in my humble opinion. Got my kind of vibe that I like, some nice kind of shaky, shuffly hats, some solid tribal kind of percussion, and some big kind of housey claps. Now let's have another look at the bass and check out the sound design in this instance. So we saw that it's playing in E minor. This is how the MIDI looks, and I've also then pitched it down by 1 octave, 12 semitones. The sound source is Trillion, and I'm using a preset called Deep Pulse Juno. I'm sure I've tweaked it a little bit. These are pretty great patches. They sound pretty good out of the box generally. Very nice. Then let's have a look at the processing, because we've got some cool stuff going on here actually. So I'm just cutting out some of the lows, adding a little bit of compression to control the dynamics a little bit. You can hear from the bass line that there's quite a bit of difference in the note volumes. I've got a little bit more EQ. I was just trying to kind of mix in the low mids, I guess. And same as on the kick, I'm cutting out the lows in these sections here, which I've used the light blue MIDI clips so I can see that visually. Now here, in this audio rack, I've got the dry signal coming through this channel here, so there's nothing on it, right? Now on these two, I've got delays. I didn't actually use this one, so let's just delete it. I've gone for the Replica XT from Native Instruments, and we are using a very short 8th note. So this is basically sounding like this. So this is what you would call like a slapback. So it's just kind of adding to the sound design and the groove, I feel like. And I'm cutting out all of the subs. And then with this sidechain compressor, I'm ducking it to the dry signal. So what this means is that that delay is not happening, or is not as pronounced when the original bass line is playing. So you'll see here this threshold pushes it down. You can see the gain reduction happening there at the same time as the bass line is playing. So it just kind of adds to the groove. It adds some kind of variation in this delay signal. I feel like it just makes things sound really clean and professional. I'm adding a little bit of reverb onto my bass line here and a little bit of saturation. These are returns from my template. Link up here to a video where I talk about my template in detail. Let's just have a quick look at them. So this is the reverb that I use for kind of setting my synths and things into a space. It's like a large room preset. The decay of 1.5 seconds, 1.4 seconds. And I'm cutting out all the low mids and subs. Hence why I can apply some of that to my bass. And then we've got this send here, crazy EQ going on, some decapitator, some limiting, some more EQ, a bit of pan, a bit more delay, basically doing like a Haas effect. And this is basically just adding saturation and width to whatever signal I push. It's quite subtle. So that's the bass. All right, so now let's have a look at the melodic elements of the track. As I mentioned, we've got this main riff, and this is kind of what it's all about. I can turn all this other stuff off, and with this and the other parts of the track, that's what we need. That's giving it the personality. That's what it's all about. Everything else is basically just to add some character and work as supporting elements. So that's a big sound, right? So let's have a look at what we're playing here in the MIDI, first of all. E minor, and I'm basically playing an E minor triad chord like this, E, G, and B, but I've just inverted the B down here. And that just helps to change the tone of the chord, basically, make it a little bit darker. Then you'll notice on that MIDI track, I've got a chord device where I'm doubling that chord. So all of those 3 MIDI notes are being duplicated up 12 semitones, and I'm taking the velocity down by half. So then those 6 notes are being fed into Diva. And Diva here, I've got, this is going to be based on the template Mini Poly. This is basically what I base 95% of my patches that I make on. I just like the way it sounds. And it looks like I haven't done too much to it at all. I've just, I think, changed this from a square to a saw, and it's just one oscillator. I've only got one oscillator turned on, and I'm just using those chords being fed into it, those to create the synthesis. We've got a slightly open, slightly plucky amplification envelope here. We've got the envelope 2, which is modifying the filter cutoff, like this. We've got this emphasis or resonance, so that's sounding like this. It just emphasizes the cutoff point of the filter. So without it, the filter has a little bit less character. It's a little bit more dull. And then I guess the only other thing of note is the feedback here, which is based on the Mini Moog Model D, and it's basically like taking the signal out and putting it back through the filter. It creates a feedback loop, and then this is how much of the signal is going into that feedback loop. And the end result of that is it just kind of sounds a bit thicker and a bit crunchier, a bit more saturated. So I take that away. See, it's a little bit thinner. Kind of has a little bit more roughness, a bit more punch. So that's the synthesis. Very, very simple. And you can see here at Trippin main riff, I've saved this into my user bank, and I think this is like a really, really good thing to do. And then when you're working, you can go back and use those presets that you've created. You've got them. It helps to give you your signature sound. So that is basically from the original, as I explained, from Trippin by Gold Tricks. And this is a Rhodes organ. I really like organs, and I use them in a lot of my tracks, and I've done this to kind of give it my flavor, right? I want to have this instantly recognizable element from the original, and then I want to have this kind of Dilby vibe as well. So if I were to just play this, maybe that could sound like one of my records. That sounds like Trippin, but it's a bit more aggressive. So the combination of those things together, I feel like the organ kind of mellows out that main riff. I like it. Big organ fan here. So let's have a look at the MIDI on this, because it's a bit crazy. So we're doing the E minor triad. It's duplicated up. And then I've got this G, okay, and this is actually a G minor 7th duplicated up, and then I've got, this is an E, or maybe it's a B, no, it's an E, because I'm playing the bass along here. I think I've just moved some notes around to make it sound different, to be perfectly honest. So I've probably just added some notes on top to make it sound different and give it a bit more emphasis, which helps to kind of give a bit of groove to the melody. So I mean, if I take away the notes that aren't in these other chords. Let's just move that down here. So it gives it a kind of more interesting feel. Still pretty similar, but I like this more. And you'll see this looks a bit crazy. It's definitely not quantized, right? So I don't play the keys. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I can't play this. But I understand that when someone plays the keys, they're hitting the notes at different velocities and at slightly different timings. So what I've done is basically programmed this in MIDI and then gone in meticulously, changed the velocity, the note length and the timing to give it more of a humanized feel. Sometimes I'll do this over 4 or 8 bars. In this case, I've done it over 2 bars, and it does give it it does add to the character of the sound. Give it a more natural, organic kind of feel. What else have we got? Processing wise, I've got Slate Virtual Mix Rack here, adding a little bit of saturation and a little bit of compression. I mean, it sounds like it's just turning up the volume, but let's grab a utility and let's give that 5, maybe 8. So it's kind of thickening up the sound a little bit and emphasizing some of those transients. Then I'm using this auto filter to bring the Rhodes in and out throughout the track. So it starts off quite a bit darker. And standard stuff, just LFO tool, pulling out some of the highs because I want it to kind of be a supporting element to this main riff. You can hear they're not like in sync, but they're kind of playing against each other, which then, again with the bass line, it's giving this kind of push and pull to the groove. Now, what other important elements have we got in here? Everything else is pretty supporting, I think. So I've got this Atmos synths, which is just a loop here. That's what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. So some kind of like deep string type things. Right, yeah, that's a pretty characteristic sound of the track. So that's just adding some kind of flavor, I guess. And I think I've pitched that. Yeah, it was not in this key, so I've pitched it down to semitones. Now we've got this slap bass, which is a really cool element. I really like this. This is again coming from another loop, but you'll see the different colors here. So what I've done is, I think the loop is almost like a stem. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this loop. I think it's from some kind of construction kit or something, and it changes over time. So I've decided which bits I want to play and when, and I'm just varying them over throughout the track. So they're just like placed throughout the track to create more or less emphasis, and it sounds like this. So it's this really cool slap bass kind of sound, which is quite prominent in the track. And then when it's more open, it sounds like this. So I'm kind of using this like effects rises, right? So it's happening here at the drop. Cool. And have I pitched this one? Yeah, so this is pitched down 3 semitones. Not much happening on here. We've got a string. This one's actually coming from my sample pack. Link up here. Underground Shades of House on houseofloop.com. Very usable stuff. I use them myself. just a string, you know, just added used to add some drama and tension in these breaks. Some nice atmosphere. Then we've got a pad coming again from Diva. Now I think, yeah, I'm using the filter here to control that a bit. So that's what the synthesis looks like, based on a Juno 60 this time, I believe. I don't know, I generally start from one of the templates if I'm doing sound design myself. That's based on the Korg MS-20. Okay, got it. So then let's go to user presets and Trippin pad. Yeah, so this is also used to kind of control the energy, create drama throughout the track, but also as just like a melodic bed all the way through. Adds some kind of nice deepness that I like in my tracks. So the final melodic element here is another Diva, and it's this guitar pluck. So it's a patch from Tim Engelhardt, his pack on Production Music Live. Really good. Used lots of stuff from there. The MIDI looks a little something like this. Yeah, so playing some chords. Not really anything earth-shattering, to be honest. By itself it sounds a bit whack, but in the context it's just adding a little bit of pep before and after the break. So you can hear it's kind of working with those other main melodic elements, those melodic rhythmic elements. So you can hear when I play those four elements together, plus the kick, they're all kind of working together, but they've also got different kind of tones. They're sitting in different places in the frequency spectrum, so they're not fighting for the same space, and that's really important to get like a strong full mix like this without having, you know, it just makes it really easy to mix. And when you're selecting sounds that work with each other, that give space for each other, that allow each other to kind of come through in the mix, then your track is going to sound much bigger, much fuller, but much more open. So we've got a bit of saturation from FabFilter Satin on here. Nothing too much really, just bringing through a little bit of brightness in those highs. We've got some chorus from Tal Chorus LX, lovely free chorus based on the Juno. So that's just adding some width and character. Nice one. Now let's have a look at the vocal. This was resung by the very talented Liv Campbell, and what I've done here, okay, so I've frozen, let's unfreeze it and have a look. They say I'm crazy. So you can hear I'm pitching this down, kind of. I'm using Little Alter Boy from Sound Toys, an amazing plugin, pulling down the formant here, pushing up a little bit of drive. But the main thing that's altering the sound is this formant. Just turn off micro shift, which is adding some chorus. I like to use different choruses on different elements just to kind of, so they don't all have the same characteristic. Maybe that's unnecessary, but it's just something I do. So without the Little Alter Boy and the chorus, it sounds like this. This feeling I cannot hide. So she's done a really good job of singing it. It just, to me, it wasn't sounding quite in the same, it's in pitch. She sung it really well, but it was kind of delivered a little bit higher than the original. So I've used this formant to just, it's almost like pitching it down, but without changing the pitch. So if I turn it on and overdo it, this feeling I cannot hide. So it doesn't go out of tune, it doesn't go out of key, but it just makes it sound deeper. This feeling So there we go. That's really cool. So if we want to do like a hardstyle remix, we can use that. So it does add a little bit of artifacts and stuff. Because we had a really good recording to work with, then it was fine. And big thank you to Kevin McKay from Glasgow Underground. He did the vocal editing on this and got it sounding really, really good. You can see here I've used a utility and monoed it before going into this. So this does have a side effect of kind of creating quite a bit of artificial width. So if I take away this utility where I've monoed it, it can sound a bit like ungrounded in the track. So I wanted the vocal to sound really solid, which is what it wasn't happening when I had this on by itself. So I added the utility. So this is a good trick if you use Little Altar Boy to mono it beforehand. Then I'm adding back some width with the micro shift, but I've got the mix set to 31.5%, right? So it's not spreading it out all the way. Quite a bit of delay. Then we've got this vocal glitch atmos. So let me just undo a bunch of this and see if I can go back to, frozen. Now we've got this vocal glitch atmos, and I'll unfreeze this. Also got lots of processing on it. So I've just taken little bits of the vocal, used this as a way to introduce it. Sounds like this. Crazy. Bugging. Tripping. Yeah, nice. I love that. And the way I've got that, let's unfreeze it. So it's just little bits of the vocal chopped out. Crazy! Right, then we're adding in the Little Altar Boy, bit of compression, adding in the micro shift. Then I've got Tantra, got the old version in here. Right, I did this track ages ago before I had the new version. So I've been playing this track in my sets for over a year now. These things take time. Using a preset called Glitch, a glitch preset called Pieces. Yep, I've got the dry wet pulled down, so it's at 50%. So it's letting through some of the unprocessed signal with the kind of glitches and the stuff that Tantra adds. Pulling out some of the low end, then adding in some serious delays with Replica XT and an unused sidechain from the main vocal. So with this sidechain from the main vocal, I was going to do basically what I was talking about in the bass line, where I'm ducking the signal from the original signal, but I deemed it to be unnecessary in this case. So in here I've basically used some of these words, pulled them down to this channel and used them to kind of accent. Maybe that would be better with the sidechain on, but you got my whole life living. I think it was just pulling out too much of it, so I've done it this way. Okay, and that is how we process the vocals. Pretty simple. The only other thing I've done here is created a little vocal reverse sweep by taking a piece of the vocal, putting some reverb on it, a big reverb, normally about 15 seconds of decay time, 100% wet, record that and reverse it, and then just have it kind of, it gives this like sucking feeling into the vocal, like this. They say I'm crazy. And then I use that for some kind of transitions and stuff as well, like here at the start. So it's also a good way to kind of help introduce the vocal to the track. Then in the effects section, we've got not really a lot at all. I've got a sweep here, like a melodic kind of thing, and I'm just cutting out some of the lows and highs of that. So that's just happening at a lot of these transitions. I've got a snare roll, which I've thrown in from a sample pack by Oscar L. nice one. So I'm just using that. Got these breaks, noise splash, impact, just like a kind of perk delay with some reverb and saturation on it and a bit of filtering. Kind of cool sound in the background a bit. Just used a couple of times to add some atmosphere. And then I've got one impact here on the main drop. So it's similar to like a white noise or a crash, but just a slightly different texture. So that's how I made Trippin'. Out now on all platforms. Link in the description to go stream it on Spotify or grab a copy from Beatport. As I said, we're in the charts, filming this ahead of time, so maybe we've gotten higher, but your support is much appreciated. And like I said in the intro, we've got a competition going where you can win a mix down from me. I've mixed for loads of artists that you know and love on some of the biggest labels in the game. The likes of Defected, Toolroom, Spinnin, Crosstown Rebels, Solotoko, Glasgow Underground, loads of big labels. So I feel like this is a pretty cool prize and something that would normally cost you around 250 euros. So just to clarify again how you enter, you buy the track on Beatport, send me the receipt on Instagram, and I will put your name into the draw. If you're one of my patrons, then make sure you mention that, and that gives you 2 entries. If you want to become a patron, there's a link in the description for that as well. It's one of the best ways you can support the channel. So anyway, that's how I made Trippin'. I hope you like it. Alright guys, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that and hope you learned something. Don't forget about the competition to win a mix. All you have to do is buy the track Trippin' from Beatport and send me your receipt on Instagram. If you're looking for something to watch next, then check out this video. I think you're going to like it. That's it from me today. I'll catch you next time. Peace!